Today I'm just going to be kind of looking at this track, Dire Docks from Mario 64, and I don't know, I have it already transcribed and worked out a little bit, so I want to go through and we're going to do a lot of listening to get used to what it sounds like, and then I want to go through the sort of elements of music here and try and break down what makes Dire Docks work, what it goes through, and then we'll do that by using the elements of music here as outlined. We're going to go ahead and listen to it, and I did this transcription a while ago, so we'll see how accurate I was with it, and we'll read along. It's worth mentioning that the way I've analyzed this, or transcribed this, I mean, it's broken into three parts, kind of foreground, middle ground, and background. So usually foreground is the melody, or whatever you're hearing foremost in the music. Middle ground is kind of maybe counter melody or some sort of interesting part that's not really supposed to be the main interest of the song, but it's still going on. But then background is whatever's going on in the background that's really just adding a little bit of oomph or sparkle to the music. So subtle bass lines, pads, things like that. It's a little bit hard to do with earlier music like this, but just because of the way old technology works. But yeah, let's just go ahead and get started and give it a listen here. So now we're at the E flat. Oops. F. Now the melody. We'll repeat back at the end of this. This is where it loops. Back to the melody start. It loops to the melody start. We're going to repeat this A section here again. Now we're going to get into a B section. It's a cool little B flat there. Cadence back into E section. This is where we get some really cool subtle strings, which I marked as middle ground, but they're probably more background. But they fade in really nicely. Very lush, homey sounding, is super nice. Now we get this almost like chorus C section. Lots of syncopation. Back to the A section, but it's got a little bit of a counter melody with the strings and the long notes, which is a nice change of pace from the short stuff we're listening to. There's drums fading in now, which is really neat. Adds suddenly a lot of energy to the music, and then it repeats back to the A section at the T. So he says 2 times, pads and drums in always. And because this is video game music, it's just going to repeat for infinity. Our song here only goes through twice. F, G, C. Our A section. The bass line changes a little bit too because we have a lot more energy the second time to kind of give it some more groove. Pretty neat. We're back to our C section chorus kind of thing. And this YouTube song is going to fade out there. Although there's still 40 seconds. I don't know. Okay, weird. This version just has 40 seconds of silence at the end. Whatever, that's fine. So, I mean, yeah, that's the music. It's actually very simple. Um, this is the case with a lot of, I mean, just a lot of music in general. It's always simpler than you think, but especially early video game music, there were hardware limitations, so people were writing more simply. I don't know the exact limitations of the Nintendo 64, but just in general, it was people wrote pretty simple. With computers nowadays and the plugins you can use, you can layer instruments on top of layers and get these super complex sounds and have a million instruments going at once, which is really cool. And we'll dive into that later when we get to timbre, because I think timbre is really the most important part, especially for modern day music. Timbre is what is the most important for when you're writing or listening to any sort of music, especially when it comes to music for media. It's a lot of computer heavy writing. And so you get a lot more into timbre. You're not just like choosing between, oh, should I use a violin or a clarinet? You're choosing between, should I use the violin sound from this specific patch layered with the violin sound from this patch, or should I use the cellos to get more bass? It just gets really complicated. So anyways, that was kind of the read along with Dire Docs. I guess to start out, what's kind of really interesting about this intro is it does this, we're in the key of G, right? So it makes sense we're starting here on our 1 chord. And usually when you get taught music theory, you learn a lot about 1, 4, 5, 1s and all these super classical era harmonies. But what we're going to instantly do in this one, and this is the case with a lot of video game music and scoring, is we're going to go, it actually goes straight to an F chord, which is the flat 7, which is why it has this F natural here instead of the F sharp what's in our key. Even though G is our home key, it is our home chord, I should say. We're going to go straight into this F natural chord, which gives us this really cool 1 flat 7 progression, which is very common in especially video games. We have our G chord to our F chord. And you've almost certainly heard it before. Even the ending of just Mario games, when you win, you get a flat 6, flat 6, flat 7, 1. Very common. But it's really interesting as it kind of fades between it. On top of that, in this intro, while it's playing, we have this Dire Docs takes place in the water level, so it's written to be, you know, reminiscent of water. But it's really interesting. It's got this almost like underwater vibe, and that's pretty easy to accomplish with the synths of the day, and this sort of almost staccato plucking boom 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 boom. And so it's instantly going to make use of that by doing this arpeggio up the G, just a G arpeggio. And then it's kind of got this little sparkly thing that happens here where it's like bum 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 bling, bum 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 bum. So basically, like this sort of alternation between G and F, it sets us really strongly into the key of G, but we know it's not G major because we're hearing that flat 7. And the way it's written and this alteration is actually really effective at being reminiscent of being underwater, but still having a lot of movement and energy and excitement, because you kind of have this wishy-washy going back and forth between your home key and then this kind of cool little flat 7 thing, but also simultaneously you have the music going up with the bum 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 bum, and it goes back down and bum 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 bum. So you have this almost like waves, the tides of an ocean, not the tides, but I can't remember the name of it, but like the back and forth. You kind of, if you're underwater in like a kelp forest or something, you can see the kelp swaying back and forth. That's just the motion of the ocean, right? And already in the first 4 bars, we're very reminiscent of that, with this little sparkly kind of light reflecting off the water, little at the top, little ear candy. So I'm not very good at piano, so I won't be playing things unless it's very, very easy. But that's the case. So anyways, these first 4 bars just repeat themselves. We go to G and F again. There's nothing new that gets introduced here. But then the really cool thing after that is, wow, I'm struggling here, is, please, game? Okay. Really cool thing after that is this E flat. All of a sudden we get introduced to an E flat chord, which is the flat 6, which again, very common in gaming, especially Mario. It's almost like a recurring theme that you'll just hear this flat 6, flat 7, 1 all the time. But it gives us a little bit of harmonic, something new harmonically to latch onto. We have, and then we have F, and it extends as 2 chords, so then we actually end up back in G at the beginning, and then we get introduced to our melody. So what that E flat chord kind of does is introduce us to like, hey, there's more harmonically going on than just this back and forth G to F thing. It just kind of gives us a little bit of taste of that, and it's really cool. I don't know how to describe it, but like, just like not classical sounding, like it's a very hip kind of sound. And so then it leads right back into this G chord, and then we get our first pick of the melody, which probably if you're at all interested in this, you already know the Dire Dire Docks melody very well. It's one of the most, I would say one of the most famous just Mario songs in general, but super vibe heavy. Listening to it just kind of makes you happy, right? So it's really, it's interesting. There's a lot going on here to be said also. First of all, we'll take a look harmonically. We already see in the first 4 bars, instead of spending 2 bars on G, then 2 bars on F like we were doing before, we're actually spending 1 bar on each, so the harmonic rhythm changes to, we get a chord change every bar. And we instantly are getting G, F to E flat to F, and this is going to start recurring now. So it's almost like the beginning intro was this slow, wishy-washy kind of thing, and then as soon as the melody comes in, it all gets compressed and it starts moving a lot faster. And then we get introduced to this melody, which starts out with 8th notes, then goes to quarter notes, and then has this long held note. So it's like 2 bars of movement kind of going around our G scale, and then but we're ending on the D there, which is very interesting. The D is, because it's actually, this D is a really interesting note because it's the 7 of this E flat major 7, which is why it's an E flat major 7. Sorry, I'm kind of covering it there, but it's an E flat major 7 chord with a D on top of it. The melody note is a D, which is the 7, which makes it significantly interesting harmonically. But we're actually holding this D over to the F chord, which is gonna make it the 6. And it's just interesting again because it's sort of going outside of the norm of classical writing, or maybe writing you would learn how to do in school, in schooling that they would teach you. But this D also is the 5 of our G chord, which would be G, B, D, right? I'm running out of space to write, but so it's like the note D is actually a very home-centered note that we're listening to, but it's kind of, we're getting D in the context of all these different chords. So that's cool. And we do start with a little bit of syncopation here. We do start with some syncopation here on beat 1. Which is interesting, it adds a little bit more to that listingness of the wave. But perhaps more importantly, after that, oops, wrong button. After these first 4 bars, we have this little C, and it's leading us back into DBG. And this is kind of where we land back at home. We go back to the G chord, we go back to everything in G, and we're like, Oh, okay, the waves have kind of settled a little bit. Before we go back into the, oh, we're listing again. And we're getting back to this cool, chill, but still sort of unusual F E flat moment. So what we're gonna do, what I want to do again is just kind of listen to the beginning of this with all this in mind and trying to keep an ear out for what we're listening to. Sparkles. Now we're in this flat 7, but we're still keeping the arpeggio is almost the same, but we're just changing notes here and there to make it kind of this listless, going everywhere moment. Now we're on this D that's going through the flat 6 and the flat 7, but now we're back home and it's great. So let's listen one more time. Home feels good. We got some sparkles. Oh, we're waving over here a little bit. Oh, we're gonna go home. Oh, we don't go home. We go to this E flat. Now F even feels a little bit more familiar. And now we're back on G. Interesting melody to really latch onto. And it's got this sort of synth sound. Has a lot of attack. It's not very sustained. But there's a lot of like almost reverb. There is some sustain, but it drops off really fast. So you have this interesting, almost like the way sound is affected when you're underwater, which is like it kind of has that weird warbled, garbled feeling. Like the sounds the synths are doing here are accomplishing that. And it's really cool. So yeah, I mean, there's more to be said here. It repeats itself again. We could go over the contour of the line is very nice. We kind of go da 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 da, which I kind of mentioned earlier is reminiscent of the way waves go and water kind of functions. But it does just sort of repeat itself here. But then we get into this B section, and the B section is interesting because it is a B section. It is completely different. The melody changes, the chords change, the harmonics change, the vibe shifts a little bit. So let's go ahead and listen to that. We're gonna start around here, 19. Oops, now we're at 21. And here comes the top of the page. All of a sudden it's like, whoa, super bright. But it's kind of got this falling bass line. Da, da, da. There's a really interesting B flat, A, D cadence into the beginning. So this B section provides a lot of really interesting sort of stuff for your ear to latch onto. It's instantly going to kind of treat C as our home key for a little bit. But what's happening, which kind of really brightens it up, because it's almost felt like G is our home key, but G is the 5 of C. It's the dominant of C. So when we go to this C, we're like, oh, maybe this is our home key. We're going to C because we've been chilling on this G chord the whole time, but we've never gotten that F sharp. So the F natural is kind of making us feel like we don't really know where we're going. And then we land on a C major and we're like, oh, here we go. But we quickly learn it is not the case because of this bass line here, C, B, A, G, and then back up, which is a very common writing tactic to kind of do that. But our harmonics here are, we have a 1 chord, but then we have a 5 chord. I'm rusty on notation. I think it's like a 6, right? That makes it over the 3rd. So this is a G chord, but it's got a B in the absolute bass, which it has this feeling of, it's a different sort of sound, but then also it's leading to this A, more importantly. It's good voice leading. And then we're on the A minor, which would be the minor 6. And then we're actually back to the 5. So it's like 1, 5, 6, 1, and then, 1, 5, 6, 5, 1. And then it's going to repeat that again. But the second time it does it, we get this B flat, which actually this is notated incorrectly. It's supposed to be G minor over B flat, not just little tiny B. So we still have our C, and then we go to our B, but then unlike last time where we went to A, we're actually going to go to B flat, which gives us, instead of a major 5, it suddenly turns into a minor 5, which is notated like that, over the third. But it leads to this really chromatic motion where now we're moving by a half step down, and it introduces this sort of, blue note isn't the right word, but it's just a chromatic note that makes it sound interesting and very all of a sudden, but it sounds very natural because we're doing this half step motion in the bass line. We're going to end up back down on our A. But before, when we got to A, we went to, over here when we were at the A chord, it went to a G. But this time the A is actually going to go up to a D, and then we're going to land back on our G chord, which is interesting. This is a cadence. Even though it feels like we're in C for this whole time. All of a sudden here, we actually kind of end up in G, because if we're treating G as our 1, D is the 5 of G, and A is the 2. So we get this like 2-5-1 all of a sudden. We're going like jazz mode for a second. But it comes so naturally out of this descending bass line that we've heard before. Just very, very well written, so much going on, and it just sounds so natural, but it's got all these elements of the motion in it. But once we get there, we're back to our usual melody up here, and we go back to our G, and we're going between G and F. I know you can't see that, but it's going back to our G, F, E flat, F, G. So that's great. We're also like, oh, good, we're back to something we recognize. But then we get this really cool strings. These are when the strings enter with the pads, and they start super quiet, and they really sneak up on you. So let's go ahead and listen to that. We're going to listen to the B section first, and we're going to listen to how it goes back to the A section, and those strings come in really nice. So I'm trying to find it. There it is. They're on this A minor, G, C. Oh, I was wrong. Okay, sorry, let me start that again. C, there it is. C over B, G over B, A minor, G, C, G over B again. Now we get this B flat. We're gonna go to A2, 5, 1. Super natural, back to this A section, but now something growing in the background. Super lush, very nice and sweet. Still repeating our familiar melody. It's growing, they're getting louder and louder. And just when we want to go back to our A section, now we're in this sort of funky section I was talking about earlier, where we're at our C section. And this part is interesting. It's been a while since I looked at it, but we have our F chord and our E chord, but our harmonic rhythm changes where we're sticking on the F chord for 2 bars, and then we're going to the E flat chord for 2 bars. And then we have another sort of cadence going on here. So, and what happens here is actually we go back and we reuse a lot of material we're used to. This is the start of the C section. We're on F. We have an F in the bass for 2 bars. We have an E flat in the bass for 2 bars. And then, just like before in the B section, instead of going back to G like we're used to, we're going to go to a D. But that makes a lot of sense because E flat and D are a half step away. So we're going back to that half step motion that we had in the bass in the B section, but we're using the A section material for it. Which is great, genius. And then we also go back here again, and we have another 2-5, but this is a 2-7, and it's over the D. So we actually have this sort of pedal note D in the bass, which is keeping our inharmonic equivalent to 2 bars, or not inharmonic equivalent, our harmonic rhythm to 2 bars like it has been for this whole section. But we actually have an A chord 2-5-1 cadence kind of going back into our G. While all this is happening, our strings are still going super lush, super beautiful, and we get this rhythm here that is suddenly so syncopated with this 1, 2, 1, 2, so that is interesting. And what it has also are these I wish I could like scroll and write at the same time. Oh my god, I can. Okay. Huge. What we have is our lost my train of thought, but we have this in the C section with this syncopated melody. We have this F natural that's on top on our melody, the da 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 da. So the top line of this melody is staying. We have F, G, G, it's staying G, A. So this is almost like a suspension this whole time. And then we finally resolve up to the A, which fits super nicely into our 2-5. And then it goes back to the G. But simultaneously, we have sixths here being played at the same time. Let me see if I can actually play this on piano. So, and then F, but then we move up a whole step with the sixth. Then we move to a D chord, and the G stays the same, but we move up for good voice leading, G and C, and then we move to our A and D. But our C is going to stay the same. All of a sudden, oh, there we go. That's a D chord, but it's a D7 because we have this flat 7 here with the C in the bass, which really, really makes us want to go to this B. And we do. And we end up back in our G. So, very, very ingenious writing. Ingenious? I don't think that's the right word. Very, just intelligent writing. I mean, it's not like... I think I looked it up earlier. This is Koji Kondo. It's no surprise that he's a great writer. Like, there's billions of essays you could read on that or watch on that, whatever. But yeah, it's really good to look at and learn. It's just so simple. It's just using these same mechanics over and over again, but it's using it in slightly different ways every time, and it's really good to go back to these and look at the simplicity and the effectiveness of them and realize, oh, when I'm writing music, it doesn't have to be so complicated. I can just reuse, recycle the good ideas I already have and use those, because those are the good ideas. Why would I make more ideas that are bad and also don't fit the music I'm trying to write? So, kind of interesting there. But so that's the end of our C section, super short C section here. There's a lot going on, but it sounds very natural thanks to all the things I just described. So we have our 2-5-1. We're going back into G here now. And now we get back into G. We go, oh, good, we're back to our G for 2 bars, F for 2 bars, G for 2 bars. Kind of this weird intro thing. Not weird intro thing, but this familiar introductory music we had at the beginning. But on top of it, we now have a melody, which is a very sustained, drawn out string counter melody. I don't think counter melody is really the right word for it. But it's this new melody that's super long, kind of fades. It's in the foreground, but it's not like a driving melody that you're like, that's going to be super catchy, but it really fits in with the vibe. And all it is doing is outlining our key notes in our chords. So we have the 3. I think you're supposed to notate it like that, right? And then we have a 5, and then in our F chord, this is the 5 of the F chord. I don't think I'm doing notation correctly, but whatever, here we are. And then we get this G, which is good. It's the 2 or the 9. Which is preempting sort of a suspension into our G chord here. We get a little taste of the G before we get our G chord, and then we have our D, which again is the 5, and we do a little run here to the 2 again, which the 9 The 2 or the 9 kind of is just, it's just like a sound that has sort of permeates culture today. It's in a lot of places. But if we're doing this one, this is our normal F triad, 1, 3, 5, 9. So the sound of the 9 or the 2 being added sounds very, it still sounds very homey and natural. It doesn't sound dissonant necessarily the way we've been listening to music for a while now. The way music has been written, that 2 or that 9 sounds natural. It's got like a little bit of dissonance to it, but it's not like unappealing. And it very quickly resolves back to that 1 anyways. But also importantly for this overall melody, it starts up high on this beat. We're kind of going down a little bit. We're losing pitch. We're not losing pitch, but it's going down the scale. We kind of go back up, but then we start really falling down. Super low. We end up on the 5 again. And then it leads super nice and naturally back to the 1. And this F sharp is actually a really interesting note because it's kind of the first time we've had that F sharp, that flat 7. If we're in the key of G, F natural would be the flat 7. It's the first time we've had that flat 7 at all in the melody, in this kind of high register where we can really hear it. And it's very, it's not jarring, but it's very like apparent that note is there. Even though this G is actually the more technically dissonant one, this F sharp one sticks out. The F sharp sticks out more because we're so used to hearing so many Gs throughout the whole piece. And then we sort of just get low, and then we even have, even though we're on the flat 7 is still a dominant sounding progression. So flat 7 to 1 sounds very like it's supposed to. It's basically it's basically a 5 chord. But we do end up on this D, which is the 6 of the chord. So it feels pseudo dissonant, maybe a little bit odd, but the D is the 5 of our, I don't know, I'm losing my music theory skills, but like it just adds more dominant Teutonic relationship expectations to us, and then we repeat back to the beginning. And at some point in here, super cool, like I mentioned the first read through, at some point in here, right before the ending, we have the drums fading in. And that part is super cool because you're getting to the end. I mean, on first listen, you don't know it's the end, but this type of music, you're going to hear it a lot. So you hear Dire Dire Docks for the 4th time, you start hear this drum fade in. And there's a lot of energy all of a sudden, and at the beginning of Dire Dire Docks, it's this sort of super intangible, I guess, super like intangible waving back and forth thing that's very reminiscent of the ocean being underwater. It's great, super vibey, atmospheric, and then all of a sudden towards the end, you've heard all this stuff a couple times now, and then these drums come in, and it just really locks in this crazy groove that's like, it's a super simple groove, but all of a sudden you're like, oh snap, okay, this is kind of really grooving, and then those drums stay in for the rest of the repeats. So it's a really interesting sort of style, I suppose, interesting choice to have those drums come in like that, because you're used to the slow atmospheric stuff, and then all of a sudden the drums come in. It's the exact same music. The music does not change at all, but it's got this drum beat under it that's kind of fast with like 16th notes, like a and it really adds a lot of energy to it. And I think that's really important for when you're playing the game. It doesn't just repeat to the top and sound exactly the same, but all of a sudden there's energy. And it kind of really extends the life of the music without having to actually write anything new. I mean, the drum, you write the one bar of drum groove, it repeats forever, but it just adds so much to it. So let's go ahead and see if we can listen back to the end of the C section. That's where we stopped listening last time. We'll listen to the end of the C section on, and then we'll go through the repeat. Okay, we're gonna get to the C section here. Holy. Sorry for that. C section. Now we're here at 51. This is that string melody over top. Anticipates the G. Oh, we're back on G. Very nice. A little bit of a run. F. You can hear the drums fading in. Flat 6, flat 7. And bam, back to the top. And it's just exactly the same as we've been looking at the whole time. Starting at the top of 13. And now there's this crazy like bass, like the bass drum's like, and there's just like a lot of groove and rhythm all of a sudden. It's like you're like, oh man. But the music is exactly the same. It's still this super back and forth waving patty. Now we've got the ride cymbal. It even anticipates a little bit. Super cool stuff. Super cool. So yeah, that's a little bit of an overview of Dire Docs. I mean, it's been said before, but Dire Docs is it's just so good at doing effectively what it needs to do. It's so simple. There's like 4 or 5 chords in this the whole time. And it's not even that much music. It's 63 bars of music. But it's just so iconic and you can listen to it forever. And I think that's really a skill I'm trying to learn, is how to write so very simply. How you can break everything down into its easiest parts. But have it still be super catchy, everyone loves it, but also more importantly, fit the media that it is written for. Because you can write catchy music. It's not too hard to write catchy, quote unquote, good music with fun rhythm, and everyone's like, oh snap, this is like, I can really get down to this. Like, it's not too hard to write. What is hard to write is someone shows you the concept art of a game that you yourself have a working concept of, and they're like, okay, we need you to write music for this that's going to sound perfect and exactly atmospheric and evoke all these emotions that we need to evoke, but also we want it to be super good and like people will love it and familiar, and if the game does well, then people are gonna be like, yeah, this track is great, and like that's ideal. That's what you want everything to be like when you're writing, or even if you're working on the project and you're telling the composer, hey, we want this. It's like, yeah, I want to write music that everyone loves too. That's just that's good. But you can't start writing music that everyone loves if you're just setting out to write music that everyone loves. You have to really kind of start with, how can I write this music to make it fit the media I'm fitting? When you're sitting down to write music for Dire Docs, you're looking, you have water. What are the characteristics of water? How can I reflect those characteristics in my music? And obviously Koji Kondo does that. He's got this waving back and forth between the G and the F, and we also have this flat 7 going on the whole time, which gives us this sort of not unnatural, but maybe wild. I don't like the word wild, but unusual sounding, kind of unknown aspect of the music, which obviously there's a lot of unknowns with the ocean, but it's still very peaceful, and simultaneously is able to be grooving and exciting, and everyone loves it. So I don't know, maybe that was a little bit long-winded. I kind of revisited a lot of points over and over again, but I think it was worth noting. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to our elements of music now, just to kind of take a look at what we've got going on here. Yeah, so our the main elements of music is sort of comprised of seven. You'll see if you look up like the elements of music, you'll see that there's varying opinions on what they actually are. Sometimes there's eight, sometimes there's five. People group some together and they like to add their own. So here we are. This is sort of this is just what I like to think of it as. They're not hard and fast rules, but they're just good devices in which to think of when you're looking at music. So we're going to look at each of these elements and revisit and look at how these elements are shown in the music we're looking at, which is Dire Dire Docks. So our first one is melody. Actually, honestly, this is one I kind of glossed over. It's usually one that I'm not super interested in or tuned in on, but it is very important to be able to write a good melody. I've seen a lot of people when they're analyzing music, they look at every single specific note in the melody and they analyze exactly which note that is in the scale and how it fits into that. And that's valuable. That's definitely valuable. That's good. I don't like to be nearly so, I guess, nitpicky specific when I'm looking at melody, because melody passes so fast. You don't hear a melody in those terms of each specific note vertically. You're not cognitively hearing every single note necessarily. When you're listening to a melody, it's this horizontal time thing. So I like to think of it more of in chunks. So maybe, let me see if I can find it. And I kind of alluded to it earlier, but like if we have, this is the main melody we're used to all the time. Ba da 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 da. Chose too low of a key. I can't sing that. But this is the Dire Dire Docks melody. If you know it, you know it very well. But like I would break this into like, instead of going like, oh, okay, D, we have a 5 here, and then a 1, and then we have like this passing tone A, and then a 3. That's not really how I'm looking at it. I'm looking at, okay, this melody is broken into essentially 3 different sections. We have the section of this first bar, the section of the second bar, and the section of the second 2 bars, the last part. What's happening in each of these sections? Now, be careful to not break up sections into bars every time. That's not always how it's going to work. But music like this, usually it's going to be like, but basically we're going from this 8th note faster rhythm to the quarter note rhythms in this bar, and then we have a long sustained whole note. So there's already a bit of structure to this melody where we start with this da 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 da. And it's a little bit more rhythmic and precise than that, but it's still reminiscent of that, of the waves crashing on a beach where they go da 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 crash, right? And I think that's it's so simple, but it's I don't know. There's so many parallels you can draw across the whole piece. And again, I'm not looking at specific pitches. It's gonna start on a note that fits in the chord. That's good. We're gonna have a little bit of dissonance with this G, but again, the 9 is very familiar sounding stuff. And then the D on the E flat. I don't know. I'm more interested in the contour and techniques used in the melody rather than the specific notes. I don't think it's too. Maybe it's just a personal thing, but I personally don't find it too hard to write a melody. It's simple to come up with a melody. It's hard to come up with a good melody, right? And I think just coming up with a melody is just putting notes on a paper and putting them together. So, but it's more about the contour, the rhythmic changes to it. The pitches are important in that the pitches are just one element in a melody, right? So I guess that's basically what I'm trying to say. But even in this first bar, we have a little bit of contour here. We're going to go up, and then we're crashing, and then we're going to go down, and then we're going to go slightly up, and then we're going to stay. So it's also already doing this. So the contour there is good. There's other melodies that honestly do very similar things. Like here when we have the ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's the same thing. We have this little pickup note. It's going with da-da-da-da-da-da, rest. Ba-da-da-da-da-da. But it's still doing the same thing. We're starting with our eighths, then we go to our quarters that are dotted, and then we have our extended note. So it's still going da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But it's doing it over the span of 2 bars now, instead of the 4 bars earlier. I can't scroll. Instead of the 4 bars that it took to do it in this V section, we're doing it over 2 bars to add a little bit of contrast, but still keep everything within the same lane, as it were. And then this C section adds a lot of rhythmic interest because we have this syncopation. Da 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 da, more syncopation. Ba da 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 da. And this, as far as pitch goes, is very simple. I was pointing it out earlier. We just have F, G, G, a little bit of a suspension, and then we go to this A. A is like, oh great, now we're at A. So because we're at A, we're on the 5. Naturally, we're gonna go back to the G, which of course we go to the B, but that's still in the G chord. So there's nothing crazy there. So that's a little bit of melody. Harmony, I might go over just quickly. I kind of talked a lot about it already. But the harmony just in the song overall, super simple. We basically almost only go between G, F, E flat, with that 1, flat 6, flat 7, 1. We go between that a lot. And then during these B sections, every once in a while we'll get the A minor, D, G as a little bit of a cadence to go back to our A section. And it even kind of happens here in the C section, just to get us back in that A section. This is a very harmonically simple piece. If other ones we might analyze in the future are probably going to have a little bit more going on, but and what's important about this, the harmony section, I left myself room to write stuff, but I don't know if I'm going to actually write stuff. What's important to note about the harmony section is that instead of having different chords to create harmonic interest, the harmonic interest is generated in the fact that we're switching harmonic rhythms very often. We're going G2 bars, F2 bars, and the next, all of a sudden we're at G1 bar, F1 bar, and then all of a sudden we're changing every 2 beats. But it's in this very natural way that keeps us interested. It keeps us interested, I guess. That's all I have to say about that. Form. I've talked a little bit about small thinking form, but big thinking form. It's actually very straightforward. Let me make sure I don't get it wrong. We have our intro here, which is it's 12 bars, right? 12 bar intro, which is interesting. It's a 8 bar phrase plus a 4 bar phrase. Or I'd actually call this, the first 4 bars one phrase. The second 4 bars, an extended version of that. So it's an 8 bar phrase. So we have that intro, whatever. That intro is just, a lot of forms have an intro. But then we have our A section. Our A section actually repeats. We have it again here. Then we have our B section. So we have A, A, B, A. Very common form. Super simple. Nothing complex. A, A, B, A. Then we're actually going to get A again. A, A, B, A, A. And then instead of going to B the second time, it goes to C. And then we go back to A, but this is actually more like the intro. The form is more like the intro here, as we have we have a 4 bar phrase and essentially an 8 bar phrase here. So it's very symmetrical. Intro 12 bars, AAB, AAC, outro 12 bars, and repeat AAB, AAC, outro 12 bars. So yeah, it's simple, and it's not even like there's no extra bars anywhere. It's very grid friendly, I suppose, but it doesn't feel like that because of all the other things we've already talked about. Rhythm, I don't know how much I'm going to say on this because, again, it's sort of been integrated into what I've been talking about the whole time. But what's worth noting and saying again is in the main melody, we have the rhythm is used very well because we have our eighth notes that transition to quarter notes, that transition to whole notes. And this is a recurring pattern of fast notes getting longer, getting longer, getting longer, rest, fast notes getting longer, 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 with a little bit of embellishment and syncopation. And the bum ba da da da. So there is that. Tempo, also going to be super quick. I don't even know what the tempo is. I have, looks like half note equals 68. Tempo is a choice that you make pretty early on in your composition. And I think, I don't know, you really have to have an idea of what you want your music to sound like with your tempo. You have to have a pseudo, you have to already be able to hear the music in your head before you write it, if you're putting down a tempo. And I mean, this is the tempo here is half note equals 68 and it works. I don't know what else to say beyond that. Dynamics is interesting because of this medium. There's not really like intense dynamics where you have piano, 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 loud, 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 piano, 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 forte, 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 or even like piano, forte, piano crescendos. Like there's not really a lot of that. Video game music is generally supposed to be in the background, so it's never going to be loud, 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 loud. It's not supposed to be engaging in that way. If you want it to be in the background, you want it to sort of be a steady dynamic the whole time. It's doing things dynamically, just compositionally. At the beginning, we're starting with just our synth, so it's kind of quiet, and then slowly over time we get our strings added, and then we get our drums added, and it becomes a louder composition through orchestration. But there's not exactly times where you're going from, oh, this is definitely a piano part, and then, oh, definitely we're a forte now. So, which just means it's good orchestration and good composition because the composition works for you and you don't have to specify dynamics. The dynamics happen and come naturally out of your composition. Last one, timbre. This is my favorite one, I think, especially when it comes to music for media. There's a billion different sounds out there. There's infinite number of sounds, especially with computer generated sounds. When I say computer generated sounds, it makes it sound like, oh yeah, like there's different kinds of beeps and there's like some boops here and whatever. But no, computer generated sound is like people have sampled actual live real strings and they put them in this software, and now we can call upon those sounds at any time we want and manipulate them however we want, because we're not limited to a live performer. We can kind of just experiment with this one specific sound to our heart's content, which can be good and bad. Sometimes you can spend too much time working on what your sound is. There's a little bit, there's kind of two avenues where you can shoot for your timbre, the sound of your music sounding very normal, natural, or like real instruments. So you want to make sure your strings sound as natural and real as possible. Or you can specifically go in a direction that's like, hey, I know this doesn't sound like real instruments, but this sounds cool regardless, and I've cultivated this sound to sound like this on purpose. It wasn't like, oh, I'm trying to emulate it to sound real, but it sounds not quite real. So, all that being said, this was on the Nintendo 64. It's a little bit old now. None of it sounds real. The string sounds they used were probably pretty good at the time, but they don't sound real, and they never really did. But I don't know. I feel like I could have a whole extra talk on like your orchestra you're choosing when you're writing something, and having consistent sounds between tracks in a project. If you're doing a game, how many the sounds, like making sure your sound is consistent between all your songs that you're writing for one game. And Super Mario 64 does this great. Most of the time it's pretty easy because you're just using the same synths, the same plugins, the same sound patches to write your music. But it's really about landing on that good sound, that good patch, and finding the correct one to start with. I think in terms of instrumentation here in Super Mario 64, or sorry, Dire Dire Docks, primarily, our primary instrument is this, what you're hearing right now, which is that synth. Blum, 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 blum. Forgive me, my synth terminology is not super extensive, but the synth is, it's kind of got a lot of attack, boom, 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 almost like a pizzicato string would sound, but it's got a lot of this sustain in the background that's giving it this wishy-washy feel, almost like a lot of reverb. But it's not really reverb. It's something else. And that is our main sound. And already that sound is perfect for evoking the feelings that we're wishing to evoke. But then we add our strings. So we have our strings sort of in the background. And that adds this super lush, warm, real life, quote unquote, sounding sound to it. So it doesn't sound so awkward, unusual, unnatural. It gives us this warm, woody sound almost to make us feel at home and comfortable, and maybe a sense of wonder that goes along with the sense of exploration and atmosphere that the synths are giving. And then obviously later we get our drums, which these are just kind of pseudo old sounding drums. I don't know. You can have a lot of different timbres within a drum set patch. I don't know the extent at which I don't know the options they had when they were writing this, but I think the choice to use drum set is less about the sound, the specific timbre of the drums, and it's more about the vibe, groove, and rhythm that the drums add. Inherently, a drum set will add, because it just all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is almost like poppy, like a pop sound, and kind of really get down with it. So, but that's it. There's only 3 instruments in this whole track. The synth carries a lot. It's got the melody and a little bit of harmony background, but it carries the foreground and the background quite a bit with the bass line and the melody. So that's the elements of music for you. Hopefully I was clear. If you have any questions, let me know. I'd be happy to answer questions, or if you're unclear about something, if I didn't explain it very clearly, or if you're like, oh, actually, I don't think that's right, let me know. That'd be great. That's my analysis of Dire Dire Docks from Super Mario 64. I hope you enjoyed. Maybe I'll do more of these. I want to do more of these. So hopefully I get some good feedback on it, and it'll be cool.